Welcome to But Is It Feminist, the podcast that supports women's rights and women's wrongs. I am your host, Amanda Hernandez, sociologist by training, hater by nature. I cannot overstate how excited I am today about today's conversation. Even though I'm a sociologist, I love reading fiction. One of my favorite genres to read is horror, and against my will, specifically body horror. There's just something about reading something that is so disgusting, so grotesque, that I just have to set the book down and go touch grass. It makes me feel alive. I also love a good horror movie. Personally, I enjoy like a good possession. I love a good sex demon, a haunted house. I've always been into the spooky stuff. So I definitely consume this content largely, but not always uncritically. I'm just there for a good time. So today I am bringing in an expert to have a conversation with. What is horror? Why do we love it? And of course, to ask the question, but is it feminist? Katie Troyer has her PhD in the humanities and is currently the director of the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning at Trinity University. Some of her really cool research includes a presentation called The Bathroom in American Horror, a book chapter titled Rebellious Natures, the Role of Nature in Young Adult Dystopian Female Protagonist Awakenings and Agency, and Placing Horror in Interdisciplinary Investigation. So I think I have found the exact right person to have this conversation with. Katie, thank you so much for being here. And I would love it if you could introduce yourself.
I'd be delighted to. And for those of you listening, you couldn't see just the huge smile that was on my face this entire time because I'm so excited to get to talk to Amanda, period. But also talk to you about horror and about it with this intersection of feminism. So a little bit more about my research first. I'm an interdisciplinary scholar because I realized that I didn't want to pick a lane because I think that life is about intersectionality and it's about those moments where we have all the things hitting us at once. And I think that's where horror thrives. So I do a lot of research about place and the role of place and the significance of place, because place is how we understand our bodies. It's how we understand our identities. And then when you begin to destroy places and bodies and identities, then we have to ask ourselves some really hard questions. So sometimes my investigation manifests into, there's a really intense French horror film called Martyrs. And I look at whether or not the concept of martyrdom and transcendency can be always religious, or if there's this horrific element, right? If like being transcendent is just by another name, torture and what that means. And sometimes it means I'm looking at hyperrealism, which I'm not still sure I understand, but I try really hard. So I like to explore things like that. And that fits in nicely with what I do to make the money, which is that I'm the director of our Faculty and Staff Development Center. And I really like to explore those places where our narratives are affected by our fears and anxieties, whether or not that's when is this due because you didn't tell me, or that sort of analysis paralysis that I think a lot of students experience now because it's no longer fight or flight, it's freeze, right? Like I like to look at how that manifests in the world of teaching. So that's who I am in terms of what I do for a living. I'm trying really hard to be good about introducing myself also as a human outside of my work. So I'm definitely an indoor cat. I'm highly allergic to nature. And so most of my activities are reading, watching movies and TV, playing board and video games, spending time with my spouse and my four-legged companions, and doing what I like to call playing creativity, which sometimes is puzzling or coloring, but it's just like being reminded that life is about the process and joy and play. But I also really like to travel, which I realize is kind of the opposite of an indoor cat. But I love traveling, particularly with my spouse. And I regularly need to be on, in, or near the ocean, in part because it is one of the scariest things that we can imagine.
100%.
Yeah, aquatic horror is one of my favorites. So I like to be in the water, in part because I like being scared by being in the water, and also in part because I just it's my happy place, the ocean, and also my nightmare place, all wrapped into one little bubble.
Katie, okay, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent,
Please.
but the ocean is also incredible. Like I have chills thinking about it right now. So I grew up in San Antonio, And there is SeaWorld San Antonio, right?
Mhm.
And so every year, my mom, like when we were growing up, my mom would love to take us to SeaWorld. I was ambivalent, but I'm like,
Mhm.
it's somewhere to go. She loved the Shamu show, and she
Interesting.
always wanted to sit in the splash zone. And this always frightened me because like, ugh, like I don't even like thinking about it. So like you can watch, like you're watching this huge orca whale in captivity swimming throughout its enclosure, and they have them like doing these tricks, right?
Mhm.
And so, have you ever been to one of these shows?
I have as a kid, but I actually sort of have a real big stance against SeaWorld as an adult, so I haven't been in probably 15, 20, 30
100%.
years, yeah.
Okay. So, like, there's one of these tricks that the trainers have the whale do, and it'll come up right to the edge of the tank and sort of, like, jump up and then jump down so you can see his underside.
Mm.
And as a kid, I would always imagine him going up and then coming down, like, on the glass, and, like, it'd be like a potato peeler,
Yes,
and it would just, like,
yes.
rip it. And now as a grown-up, I know I'm stressed out when I have dreams about the orca whale impaling himself
Yes,
on the tank. Um,
yes.
and, like, last night, we went and watched, the new Jurassic Park movie,
Oh, yeah.
and one of the dinosaur heists they have to do is, like, collecting DNA from one of the whale dinosaurs. And even watching it, I'm like, "Oh, no, it's gonna get Scarlett Johansson."
Yes, yes,
Um, so, yeah, I feel you on the ocean being frightening and exhilarating.
yes.
Wow. Sorry, I got
No,
off
I love that because it's so right. It just like what you described, even though that's not my fear, now I'm like, "Ooh, maybe that's gonna be a new fear that I've adopted."
You're
It
so
just feels
welcome.
right. Yeah, thank you for giving that to me.
Um, okay, so I'm gonna start us off with my foundational question that I ask everybody is, how do you define feminism? And if you identify as feminist, how did you get there?
Great questions. Also the ones I'm most scared to answer.
Ooh.
Yeah, which as, you know, and as everyone who's listening will discover pretty quickly, I like to be anxious. I am anxious by nature. So it's not a you problem, it's a me problem. But I was thinking about this a lot because it's it's so hard to define, and right before we started recording, you kind of said this, right? Because I asked you, like, why this question of, "But is it feminist?" And then you gave this really eloquent answer that was like, "Because it's complicated." Um, and that's part of that word, I think, has to be part of the definition, but I think for me, feminism is understanding that women's lives, their rights, their words, their actions, their autonomy, their bodies are not just have the right to be in a space, but they are needed in the
Mm,
space for us as humanity, for us as, denizens of this planet to be at our best. And that doesn't mean that all women are perfect, right? Because that's definitely not true. And of course, the horror genre really likes to remind you of that. It just means that we not only deserve to be here, we have to be here. In all of its complicated mess. And this is where I begin to be uncertain how I can define it. Because if I'm going to say that all women get to have their voices be heard, have their bodies be recognized, then I have to ask myself, do things that don't resonate with me personally as feminist count? And also,
mhm,
is it possible that things that we have coded historically as feminist are actually not, right? Like I think about a lot of the fact that working is seen as such a feminist move, but sometimes it's the way to survive. And I'm
yeah.
not saying that survival can't be feminist, but I do think that there is a way in which we are, doing everyone a disservice by trying to create these really nice categories. I do want to say, and I think it's important to say, and I'm certain that most of the folks listening to your podcast will not be upset by this, but even if they are, I think it's important for discourse that I do think that trans women are also an important part of this. I think it's girls and I think it's women. And I think that the challenge is that when a space is sacred, it's often sacred because it feels invitational only, because it feels like it
Mhm,
belongs to a select few. And I know for many people, place and a space stops feeling sacred when they feel like it's being encroached upon by outsiders. And I understand that, but I think that we have to be much more inclusive about what our definition is. Whether or not that gets into this conversation of whether or not men can be feminists or just allies
Mm.
is like a pin. Let's put a pin in that because that's not important in this moment. But I do think that we just have to remember that we're only at our richest when we're all there, right? So yeah, so that's how I would define it. I don't
Yeah.
know. I need some like gentle reassurance that at the very least
Oh,
I didn't
100%.
completely. Okay.
Yeah, I'm like, we don't do turf shit here. Like, no, I love that.
Yes, and also just the like. I don't know. I know that I'm the one being interviewed, but how do you define feminism?
I do the same thing you do, where I'm
Yes.
like, well, it's complicated.
Yes.
I so when students ask me this question, um, I generally say something to the effect of feminism is an identity and something you do.
Mm,
It's the idea that we can live in a society free of oppression,
that's
all
beautiful.
kinds of oppression. And then we dig into it, but that's like my my general like, there doesn't need to be oppression, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
No.
end of story.
Yeah.
And the second part of your question, like, how did I come to feminism? I don't have a story or like a moment of awakening. I just think that as I've begun to, as my brain has continued to develop, and as I have begun to understand how complicated everything is, I'm not sure I have a choice to not be feminist, but I don't think I have a choice to be true to who I am,
Yeah.
and not believe in this because of exactly what you said, right? At the end of the day, it's about oppression and it's about assuring, it's about avoiding oppression by ensuring that everyone gets to be present and have rights. And I just like, I don't think I cannot live with myself in a world where I don't identify as someone that believes in that.
Yeah, I feel that deeply. You gave me chills, Katie. That's
Oh, well, thank you.
beautiful. Um, so even though I cannot quite articulate it, in my heart, I know that there's something about horror as a genre that feels liberatory. I think that, like, taps into some of the stuff we were just discussing, and that feels very feminist to me. Horror is about power, it's always about sex, it's about social norms, all these things that feminism is very concerned with. I can also see how some people would be like, "It's not that serious. It's just a scary movie. It's just a scary book, whatever." So what is your, like, 2-minute pitch for reframing horror as a genre as feminist? Or maybe it isn't, but I suspect that you think it is. Um, so how would you respond to someone that would ask you, "Is horror feminist?"
And I love the fact that there's like 3 versions of that question, right? Because I think that what that does is it gets to the heart of the fact that it's complicated, right? I guess that's gonna be, if we were on Sesame Street, that would be the word of the day, right? Complicated. Because I think often horror is not feminist, right? I
Mm.
think that horror is often very conservative in nature, and it doesn't take more than watching a few films for you to be like, "Oh, okay, well, clearly the women will die, but only after they've proven themselves not worthy." And by that, it means that
Mhm.
they're maybe a little bit mean, and maybe a little bit aware of their body. And there's so much horror that does that, and that can't be denied. There's a really amazing scholar whose work I appreciate, whose name is Linda Holland Toll, and she helps me really understand what type of horror scares me the most, and
Mhm.
why some things feel horror on the surface but not really like below the water. And the terms were affirmative versus disaffirmative, and she said affirmative horror at the end of the day really just affirms that we're okay, society's okay, yes there are monsters, but good news, we've defeated them and we've reverted everything back to the status quo.
Mm.
Whereas disaffirmative horror is like, actually, we're the problem, right? Like, let's just acknowledge that society is the issue, that the monster in the room is us.
Mhm.
And I think that in that space of disaffirmative horror is where there is room for feminist horror to
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
And there's so many amazing scholars that have devoted their lives to talking about how that might manifest and play out. And it's interesting because sometimes it's things like Clover talking about final girl and saying that the final girl is the one who survives in part because she's not quite a woman as coded by feminine, so she's identifiable to everyone. And it's like, oh, well, is that? I mean, sure, she's the one who kicks butt, but is that feminist, right? That she's like has to be okay enough for men to be able to identify with her, right?
Yeah.
And then there's Creed, who talks about the monstrous feminine, and says actually, the thing that horror does is it shows that women are quote scary because they have the power or the potential to castrate, as opposed to Freud's idea that like women are sad because we are castrated, right? Creed is like, actually, we could reclaim this and say that women are terrifying, and deservedly so, because they have the power to castrate. But even in there, I think, that scholarship is coming out in the early 90s. I think there's something a little bit, but okay, but like, do women that are different have to be monsters, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I think the answer is that at its best, horror has the potential to make us not just question why certain identities and bodies and places are habitually destroyed, but to also question whether or not we can ever easily understand the things that scare us, and if sometimes the things that scare us are also the things we desire. There's a monster scholar who says that fear of the monster is really a kind of desire. And sometimes that's a sexual desire, but sometimes it's a desire to just like, wouldn't it also be nice if I didn't have to wear a corset all the time and could, spend time with my female gal pals like I want to? And by female gal pals, I mean the women I'm having relationships with, right? And so then we have Camilla, right? And we have some of these texts that are doing that. So I think it can. And there's one other thing I wanted to say that isn't feminist, but it is, I think, really important part of the narrative because it's about reappropriation. So there was a great documentary that came out in 2019 called Scream, Queen, and I think it's really important because it's a play on this idea of the Scream Queen. But what it is it's talking about the fact that there was a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 that came out in 1985, and instead of having a final girl, we had a final guy, played by Mark Padden. And Mark Padden just got mocked mercilessly for his performance because it was coded as very feminine, and it was explicitly and implicitly implied that he was just too gay for the role, and he was closeted, and so he actually left the industry because it was so toxic, just the backlash he got. This documentary that came out in 2019, though, talks about the fact that the queer community has reappropriated this film and been like, yes, this is exactly what we want. We want to see people who look like us. We want to see people who maybe the mainstream are mocking them, but for us, this is who we are. And I think that that's what horror has the potential to do, is that it can become a space of reappropriation and reclaiming in a way that is distinctly feminist.
I'm sitting here just like, yes. I see why you teach classes on this.
Yeah, it's hard not to get excited about it.
I wish I could remember the first time I'm sure it was a book. I'm positive it wasn't a movie. But I remember reading something and being like, we are the monster.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if that's like where my love. Okay, I do know part of my love for this. This is off tangent. I might cut this later. But like as a kid, I loved all the like horny, scary movies.
Yes.
They're gonna kiss.
And then it's gonna be scary.
And it's gonna be scary. And so I like Sleepy Hollow, the Dracula movies. I don't know if The Mummy really counts as scary. Like it scared me, and I wanted to kiss everybody on the cast.
Oh my gosh, yes. They're all so pretty.
All of them.
Yeah, and I'm always like, do I want to be you or be with
Yep.
you? Yes, all of the above.
Rachel Weisz specifically in that movie. I was
Yes.
like, do I want to be her or kiss her? I don't quite know.
That's amazing.
Both. But yeah, the idea that we are the monster, society is the monster. And I also love that idea of like the affirmative disaffirmative, because I'm thinking of stuff I've read recently or watched recently, and I feel like and maybe it's just a selection effect because I'm choosing the movies to watch, choosing the
Sure.
books I'm reading. But I feel like a lot of the genre does kind of do that disaffirmative thing. I'm thinking of like Sinners that came out
Oh my gosh,
recently.
which was outstanding. Every human, like if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I haven't seen it yet, you should like pause, go watch the movie, and then come back because it is one of the best films I've seen recently. In fact, I cried during it because
Mm,
not because of the narrative, but because there was a moment where I remembered how beautiful cinema could be when it's done right.
mm,
And I just teared up. And it was at the dance sequence, right? Throughout time. And I was
yeah.
like, oh yeah, this is the power that cinema can have. Sorry. Anyway,
Yeah,
yes.
no, don't be sorry. Yes. That stays in.
But you're
Um,
right. Films like that
yeah,
are playing definitely with that realm of disaffirmative.
yeah.
Can I, before we go on to the next question, I wanted to say for people that are excited by this question of like, is horror feminist? I think there's a couple of interesting books that people could
Mm,
read. One is called Hear Us Scream, The Voices of Horror. And it's a series of essays. And in there's one by a author. It's Zoe Rose Smith, and the title of the piece is Learning to Fight Like a Final Girl: How Horror Inspired Me to Become a Woman Without Women. And she says in there that before finding horror, I always felt a disconnect with the people around me and with a lack of female influence. There was always something missing. But through horror, I discovered a sisterhood of women that have been the women that I've needed in my life. And
mm,
so there's also this part about like the women in horror as a community that's really interesting. There's another one that's called Creepy Bitches: Essays on Horror from Women in Horror. And so again, it's the people who are writing it, who are reading it, who are filming it. In the introduction, she says, this is Sandra Carpenter, we are here, we are creators. We are undeniable in all of our feminine glory as we tear your hearts out and spray your blood upon the walls. And so I think that another part is that maybe even if texts are not always themselves feminist, I think the horror community is increasingly feminist, and it's such like some of the nicest people I know are
yeah,
horror creators, filmmakers, and writers. Like they're just the nicest, kindest, most inviting folks. And I think that that's another facet to just think about, is that even if the texts aren't always that way, I think the community increasingly is.
that makes sense to me. Makes me think of like metalheads. They're
Yes.
always the nicest, sweetest
Yes.
little cutie pies.
Exactly.
One movie that has gotten a lot of feminist cred, lots of feminist discourse, has been The Substance. So this is the 2024 body horror film starring Demi Moore. And I know you have some thoughts on this.
Uh,
So can you start by telling us the plot of The Substance? And then what are your general thoughts on it as a feminist scholar of the horror genre?
yeah. Okay, so I like to do the types of plot summaries that still leave room for you to watch the film. But then also we will undoubtedly have spoilers because I think the ending has to be talked about. But the premise is that we have this character named Elizabeth Sparkle, who's on the cusp of her 50th birthday. She's being played by Demi Moore, and she is a sort of like fitness guru, sort of Richard Simmons-esque, Olivia Newton-John-esque. And she's, being aged out, and she's being aged out despite the fact that the men who are in the industry, and one of them is very memorably played by Dennis Quaid, are definitely not being aged out. If anything, they're being celebrated for their leathery agedness. And so she's like, excuse me, I'm exquisite and beautiful. And there's this scene where, Dennis Quaid's character is eating
Mm-hmm.
shrimp like things. I'm gonna eat prawns. And it is probably the most disgusting moment in the movie for me. And here's, Demi Moore's character just beautifully kitted out, right? And he's like, you're getting too old. And ugh, and his mouth is so gross. So
No.
Elizabeth Sparkle has to ask herself, what do I do? What are my options? And so she is told that there's this thing called the substance that can allow you to have a younger, more beautiful, more perfect version of yourself. And she decides to do it. And this is where we really begin to get to the body horror, because basically Sue is going to be birthed from her, but from her back and sort of from her husk. And
Mhm.
Sue is a younger version of not even really of Elizabeth Sparkle. She is her person in her own right, but she is nevertheless the child slash not clone, but something of Elizabeth Sparkle. And Sue's played by Margaret Qualley. And Sue begins to live a really excellent life because it's really hard to not feel like you're living a great life when you're beautiful and everyone tells you you're beautiful and everyone tells you you're talented. But the problem is that if Sue is living her best life, then Elizabeth cannot. And vice versa. And they're supposed to trade out after a week, but Sue decides increasingly that that's not what she wants to do. And there are massive repercussions for that, but they're mostly ones that Elizabeth Sparkle has to pay. And as the film continues, you are going to expect that if you had a deal to live a beautiful life and all you had to do was keep letting someone else suffer, and it's not even someone that becomes one of the big questions is at what point can you be as selfless as you need to be. And then Sue's begins deteriorating at one point, and then we have this beautiful sequence with so much fake blood and things like that. And so that's the general premise. I think what's important is that it's not a cloning story, nor is it really a symbiotic story. I think it would have been easy for it to be either of those. It's a little bit more complicated than that, while still addressing some of these things that are questions we are constantly asking ourselves about the rights that the bodies have. So that's the premise. Is there anything you would add to that, having seen it yourself?
No, I think you did that beautifully.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the question of, is it feminist? So are you, I know in the notes you had written out this thing about like your feelings and thoughts. I was wondering if you would like share those, because I think that
Mhm.
is the like perfect segue into discussing this as a
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
potentially
yeah.
feminist text.
And I'm listening to your synopsis of it, and I'm like, oh man, I missed the class analysis.
Oh yeah.
Because like the way you describe these two people, these two entities that are in relationship with one another, if one is going to thrive, it comes directly at the expense of the other.
Yes.
This is the way I describe class status and like exploitation to students. And I'm like, oh man, I can't believe I missed that.
No, that's great,
So
because the film suggests that it is possible to live in a world where both parties could thrive, right? If
yeah,
everyone is responsible and does their part, then it could be this mutually beneficial thing. Um, but we have evidence that that has never happened, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
that's just not what happens when anyone has that class distinction.
Oof,
Yeah.
yeah. So I did not watch the movie when it had first come out, and it wasn't because like, I didn't want to, it's just, like, a timing thing. Um, but back, like, in March, a friend had texted me and was like, "You need to watch this because you are feminist and you will like it." And I was like, "Yeah, girl, let me watch it." And so I ended up really struggling with it, and I felt bad because I was like, it wasn't that I disliked it, it's just I felt like I had gone into it with this friend priming me, right, of like,
Yeah.
this is a feminist movie and you will like it as a feminist. Um, and so when I was prepping our notes, I went back to the text messages that her and I had exchanged. And the few things that I had said was I felt like it didn't really add anything new to the discourse around aging, beauty standards, the idea that it's unfair that women cannot age, that they get aged out, that there's different beauty standards than there are for men in basically every industry, but in this one, it's, media. And then I had also said that I felt frustrated, and I think you get at this a little bit. In my head, I was thinking of it as a clone story, right? So I felt frustrated that Elizabeth basically gets this second chance with Sue, but other rather than do anything different or change her approach or like I'm such a mom. I'm like, why isn't Sue empowering other women?
That's right.
I'm like, she just goes bananas, right? She has a great time. And so there's that element of it where I felt very frustrated with what the characters did with their either second chance or first chance. And then that ending sequence with the lots of the blood and the grotesqueness, I was like, wait, is women's vanity the villain here, or is society the villain here? Like, who's the bad one here? I couldn't quite figure it out. And then just like to make fun of myself, I topped off this text like being like, it's kind of like Barbie. It's talking about feminism, but is it? It introduces these ideas to people. And then, like, again, because I am who I am as a person, I was like, but is it feminist? I don't know. And then look at me now.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm sure that you can problematize that in a lot of ways, but like, how would you respond to my very surface level?
I thought that it's perfect because I think that you're right. I think that this is a film, we'll say the word one more time, say it with me, complicated. That is complicated because it is doing some things really effectively, and is perhaps not doing other things as effectively. And this is going to sound very, very tangential, but I promise I'm going to tie it in. So I read this piece and back in like 2023. It was actually a BuzzFeed piece by an author named Izzy Amphil. And it said, the Mindy Kaling backlash has lost all nuance. And so it was actually about Mindy Kaling and how people were getting tired of the fact that she was, quote, writing the same Indian character again and again. And the same, not just Indian character, but the same Indian female character again and again. And the author was like, okay, but we don't get upset when people write the same white guy again and again and again, because if you don't like that particular iteration, you can go and find a different one. And so Amphil argues, like, is it possible that the problem is that we only have one Indian author creating stuff, and she's doing the thing that she wants to do, but that's the only thing we get. And so we don't get to it, and so is it her responsibility to single-handedly break the system, when she shouldn't be criticized necessarily for being an author? And then Amphil says, but also, maybe some of her depictions are problematic. We can talk about that, but we can't blame her for the fact that this is all we have.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a similar case to be made for the substance. I think the problem is that we just don't have enough films like this that are really pushing boundaries and borders on specific subjects in a way that has the potential to be feminist, so that this text has to, and similar with like the Barbie text, like it has to be the only thing we have, right? And so as the only thing we have, it's not enough. But as a part of the conversation, I think it's perfect. So I think it depends on how you're seeing the text, in that respect. And I do think, there is the idea that Sue is Elizabeth's clone. I think the reason I have to decide that she's not is like, if she's an identical clone, when they have noticed that she looks just like young Elizabeth. I think that's why I made her own entity. But you are right that it is perhaps not pushing things as much as it should about like why are you continuing to do this with the one chance that you have? And also I think you're 100% correct that there is not enough critique, even though it is present, of the system, right? So I think that is an absolute truth. But I also think that there's some interesting things in this film in terms of how thoughts that it made me have.
Yeah.
Independent almost of the narrative. So I think one of the things we have to acknowledge is that this is a film starring Demi Moore, right? So we have our writer and director, Coralie Farge, who managed to get this person in Demi Moore, who has been coded as this sex idol, but only in that limited time, right? Between like late teens and late 20s, right? Where that is acceptable.
Yeah.
And there's a interview that Moore does in relationship with the substance, where she talks about how when she was filming Indecent Proposal, it was after she'd had rumor, and she biked to and from the set every day. And she biked, it was like total 60 miles a day after filming a 12 or 18 hour day, because there was so much pressure for her to look her best. And she said some of it was pressure she'd put on herself, but of course, most of it wasn't. So one of the things I found myself thinking about as I watched this film was, is it possible that it was a feminist experience for our
Mm,
actresses? And not just Demi Moore, because this is Demi Moore. One of my favorite parts is when the film clearly establishes itself as a comedy horror film, is about the time that um, Elizabeth just embraces her witch characters, right? She's got her little witch finger that's all old and crusty, and then she just goes manic. And you can just see Demi Moore like living her best life while filming those scenes.
yeah.
And so I think there's that part, but I also found myself constantly wondering, what is this film like for Margaret Qualley to film? Because she is undeniably a beautiful woman who's having to be in a film that is asking her to ask herself constantly about just how fleeting this is and whether or not she wants to keep being culpable in this system. And I don't
Mm,
know, maybe Qualley didn't have any like deeper thoughts about it, but I can't help but feel like it must have just been dissettling for
yeah.
her to make this film. And so in that respect, right, I think that there's a layer in which it becomes potentially a feminist text if we talk about the sort of meta narrative or the like textual layers that are in addition to the story itself.
I love your analysis because I feel, and the word nuance gets thrown around a lot, but like it is very nuanced and generous. And to me, I think that's what's very striking to me, of like this very generous but critical reading of the film, of like,
Mhm.
yeah, it could do those things better, but what if we reframed it in this way? And I think bringing humanity back, not back, but acknowledging the humanity of the people who worked on it too. I love that reading. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. I also wanted to talk about the fact that, you know, we have this woman who's writing and directing it, and I think that makes a difference too. Um, so I saw it. There's a specific theater, and I won't name which one, but there's a specific theater in San Antonio that I personally struggle with the audience that tends to be in that theater, and especially with horror films. In fact, the only time I ever left a film in the middle was at that theater while watching a horror movie because there was someone that very loudly made a very racist comment, and I just was like, nope, and I'm done. And the substance needs a particular audience at the best of time. And
Mhm.
the audience that was with us, there was this one girl who clearly was not handling it very well. Her friends had like forced her to come, and she had so many reactions. And then there was this like older gentleman and his even older mom who had attended. And and then there were, yeah, and I honestly think they were like, oh, a film with Demi Moore. Like I think that was what they do. And then there was my spouse and me, and we were laughing because it's a funny movie. But I remember there being a moment where I asked myself, okay, is this funny where we're supposed to be laughing at the fact that she is decrepit, and it's supposed to be an ironic source of horror, or is it and comedy, or is it just an unintentional one? And there was a moment where I thought it was just like, ew, you know what's funny? Women that aren't pretty. But then it quickly made it clear it was actually like, you know what's funny? The fact that we think that women that aren't pretty are, you know, monsters. And I think that the sophistication there that happens in the comedy worked really, really well for me and became a really a transgressive, it was a transgressive laughter. Afterwards,
Yeah.
the mom, again, she must have been in her like 70s. And not that 70s-year-olds can't enjoy horror, but I know she only went to it because it was Demi Moore. Like they definitely didn't know what was happening. She put her hand on my spouse's shoulder and she said, I'm so glad for your laughter. It was the only thing that made me be able to get through this film. And I just, so, you know, but, and no one else was laughing. And I think, again, that kind of like, if you get the humor and what it's trying to do, I think it becomes more of a feminist text. If you see it as laughing at, not laughing with, right? I think
Mhm.
that makes a difference. And Eliza Sue, my favorite part of the film is when Sue has made the mistake of realizing that she has to live in somewhat of a symbiotic relationship with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is no longer in the picture. And then she becomes this beautiful amalgamation that is the monster called Eliza Sue. And there's a moment where she puts in her little earring, but she doesn't have an ear, and then it just chimes and you know, and like, and I just, as someone that has always struggled with whether or not, I consider myself beautiful. I actually I
Mm.
really resonated with Eliza Sue, where it was like, sometimes I try my best, but I'm just still a little monstery, and there was just like, I actually really identified with it because I was like, yes, every time I look pretty, maybe I do look a little bit like Eliza Sue too, but it's okay because I can still rock my little outfit just like she did. And I think that that actually is weirdly feminist again, where I wanted to identify not with the beautiful women, but with this adorable little monster that was just so sad, but also the best part of the film.
I love that. The thing that popped into my head during that last bit is there's been this creator online who's doing a series right now, and she does she did day 1, day 2. I think we're currently on day 7, and her thing is day 7 of treating myself like a hot person.
Interesting.
And she's like, I don't feel like I'm a conventionally attractive person. No one's ever treated me like I'm a conventionally attractive person. But what if I just start treating myself like I am?
Oh my gosh.
And because she's like, I went to the salon. Like, I put
Yes.
on makeup. I put on jewelry. And I'm like, yes, I love that. Like,
That is amazing.
yeah.
That's a perfect, yeah. And again, I think that's like, I mean, I'm sure that as you were watching that, you've been asking yourself, but is that feminist? But that's just where it gets exciting, right? Because like sometimes complicated makes your brain tired, but sometimes it's the most magical place you can be. And I think that like, while the film is not perfect by any stretch, it gets so close to doing the things I want. And there's a line in the movie The Craft, the 1999 film, where this bus driver is like, careful, there's a lot of weirdos out there. And then the one of the teenage witches says, we are the weirdos, mister. And I think that this film, The Substance, is asking us to consider the power of being the weirdos, and that like, is it possible that the only way we will be able to live is if eventually someone has the guts, and at some point we see all the guts to say, no, I get to be on this stage even though I'm not
Yeah.
this beautiful by your definition creature. At the same time, though, she's up there not because she's reclaiming her agency, but because she's so anxious, because that's the only way she's defined her worth, right? Because it's more Sue at that moment than Eliza Sue, and so it's not entirely feminist, right? Because she still wants it so badly that she not only has killed someone else for it, but that she can't exist in any other space, and literally she doesn't survive any other space. And then
And then at the very end, the star just gets the ice cream and the
yeah,
fries and everything dropped on it. It's like, we
exactly.
all forgot anyway.
Yes.
That was a very bleak ending for me.
It was an incredibly bleak ending and incredibly depressing. And this is where I do think, to your point about, vanity is the source of horror, women's vanity or the systems. This is where I think it begins to say, maybe it's the system. I just don't know if you can pull that off, that big of a reveal, in the last like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
During the credits when people are leaving anyway.
Yeah.
I am cautious before I recommend it to people, because one thing people should know, if you haven't seen it already, is that it does have over 5,000 gallons of fake blood, which is the equivalent of like a silo. If for those of you that aren't like just up on your measurements, and it is incredible, just the amount of blood that's in there. But if you've made it that far into the film, and there were a few people who definitely did not make it that far into the film in that showing that I went to, then I think you'll be like, ah, yes, where else could it have gone but here?
I agree with you though, in the Dennis Quaid eating character is the most easily the most disgusting part
Yes.
of the movie. It's not the blood, it's the close-up shots of that man eating with his mouth open.
Yes. And eating, speaking of people who are living their life like they think they're hot, right? Like, he's doing it, the character's doing it with such just like absolute, like, wouldn't you want to see me masticate my food? Yeah, it's just, and there's other things that I know other people found much more disturbing, because the birthing-esque sequence is really intense. And it is hard to watch. There's a sequence where Demi Moore's character and Margaret Qualley's character are pretty much naked, like wrestling in this
Yeah.
fluid. And it is a very uncomfortable scene. But the one that I'm just always like, it was the grossest thing I've seen this year in cinema. It's always that scene of Dennis Quaid's character eating, and then later having the gall to be like, "You're prettier when you smile," and it's like, sir.
I feel like there's so much more to be said about that, but I gotta stop us at some point.
I know. Yes. There's that line, right, where everyone else is like, okay, well, I know you're all having a good time, but it's time to end it. But I'm having such a good time because this is an important question that you're asking. And I'm glad you are, because I like the fact that you're asking it in a way that's not letting people can have an answer, but you also kind of made it clear that like multiple people can have different answers and we can still be together in this space. And I think that's really important, is that we're using this to like separate people. Like, is it feminist or not? And then you get to go into a bucket. And like, we won't thrive if we keep separating ourselves out from other people, right? That's just another form of oppression.
Yeah. And that's why I like this question so much. And with the other conversations I've had, and even in my research of like, but is it feminist? I'm like, it can be. It depends.
Yes.
It's complicated.
Yes.
But making the umbrella, the tent, however you want to think of it, is as broad and wide as possible.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Katie, thank you so much for spending time with me today. This was a wonderful conversation, and I regret to inform you I will be emailing you about horror from now on.
Good. I'm so excited. That's the win, right? Like, I get to spend more time with you. Yay. Thank you so much for letting me join you today.